So let's start off what we always do with the word authenticity. It's such a buzzword. You probably hear it all the time.
Yep.
What does it mean to you though?
Unabashedly, like, not even feeling any kind of shame, just doing you. It's being who you are, not assimilating, not thinking that you're doing it for someone else, not even thinking about it as you hope you will see yourself doing it. It's just doing you. I think you do hear it a lot. You hear it a lot when it comes to people being vulnerable or transparent. And to me, I don't know, man, like I've done a ton of these types of interviews. And what I found is that a lot of people change when the lights go up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think a lot of people change when the lights go up and the mic's in front of their face, and they become like an exaggerated version of themselves. I think what you're going to get from the most quote unquote authentic people is they are who they are when the lights go up and when the lights go down. And I think what that means is you feel comfortable about who you are. You feel comfortable about your flaws. You feel comfortable about your history. You feel comfortable about your past, but you feel most comfortable about where you're going because of all those damn things. You know what I mean? And if you feel comfortable with all those things, you're going to show up like yourself before the camera and after the camera. That's what authenticity means. Authenticity means is I tell every single one of my teams, tell every single one of my, the people that I talk to is just do you. And if you do you, don't worry about anything else. You're going to show up in a quote unquote authentic manner.
Were you always comfortable doing you though?
Absolutely not. No way, man. No way. No. I feel like it's been like, it was like 10 years where it was like, I had to assimilate to the cultures that I was in, to my coworkers. I felt like I had to assimilate and chase a version of me that would be more accepted. And what I mean by that is, when I entered into my first job, there were many times where people would tell me, and I was like 23, that they would tell me, well, Eric, I don't see you as like an Asian person. I see you as another white guy. And in my head, I was always like, all right, good. I did it. Like, I don't got to worry about that. That's not something I need to think about. Like, I did it. Right.
Was it almost like a compliment?
Yeah. And to
like
me,
my
I was
impression
like,
was so good that they're telling me I'm a white guy. Yeah,
they tell me I'm a white guy, right? And how wrong was I to think that? Like, incredibly wrong now that like I'm 15 years away from that moment. But in that moment, you feel this pressure because no one else around you looks like you, and you don't want to be different. You know what I mean? At that moment, you don't want to be different. You just want to be like, listen, man, just let me do my thing. And like, just like, I don't want you pointing out like crazy flaws that I have. Like, I'm just trying to survive right now. And I think for me, that was a combination of different things. One, being in a tech company that was predominantly white, and two, growing up in a predominantly white area where there wasn't a ton of Asian people. And so therefore I had like a double combo where it's like, all right, cool. I know how to survive because I survived in like my childhood. And so I could probably take those learnings and bring it into my corporate, my corporate self. But it took about 10 years for me to unravel that and dismantle that. And even the things that like people were telling me, like I had relatives tell me, in order for me to survive in tech, which again is predominantly white, Eric, you can't look a white superior in the eyes. You just can't. You got to keep that head down. You got to work hard. And this is coming from someone that was, they grew up, poor. Their parents grew up in the internment camps, and they had these survival tactics, right? And so they wanted to impart some knowledge, to me, that by saying, all right, you got to survive. And the way you're going to survive is doing like not looking at these people in the eyes. Obviously, I never did that. But it shows you the opportunity that we have to unravel and dismantle all of these systemic issues that have literally plagued our communities for so long. And we think that it's okay to assimilate and to conform. But if you've heard anything I've ever talked about, I am 100%, 1000% against all of that, because I believe that we are better, we're more creative, and we will get better talent. We ourselves will become better. Should we not do any of that ever?
Yeah, and I agree with all that, and I think it's so fascinating because I think people often assume that it's when you go into your first job that you start the assimilation process. But the example that you shared, which is very similar to my experience, it's like, no, 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 like we've been trained to assimilate often
Mhm,
by even like our
mhm.
families, right?
Yeah,
And it often comes from the traumas that they've experienced. I think it's to protect us, right? Because they don't want us to go through similar things. Like, for example, like my grandfather was very focused on his appearance. Like he believed if he looked a certain way, then like people would leave him alone, for example, right? But
yeah,
it's interesting, like you called it survival tactics. Like I'm getting goosebumps even when thinking about what your family probably had to go through in order to learn those tactics and then shares those with you. It was like, hey, if you want to do anything, like trust me. If you don't
yeah.
like and to not get hurt, like do this.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right? Like it's just this. Like, listen, facts only. Like, America has a long history and tradition of racism, violence against minorities, and aggression towards people who are not white. And many times, in previous generations, have had to deal with that. And in order for me to sit here, they've had to survive, right?
Mhm.
And so, of course, they're going to impart some knowledge of how they've survived, assuming that nothing has changed. Now, I think it's kind of our job in this generation to enlighten and educate that it's a different world now. It's a different world now. I am having conversations that they probably wouldn't have had. I'm sitting in positions that they have probably never seen a person that looked like me sit in these positions. And because of that, yes, you take with all that history with you, for sure. But you also take the opportunity of, I'm going to take that history, I'm going to understand why they're telling me this. And now I'm going to channel that type of energy to hopefully change the conversation. Because I
Yeah.
do think we have bigger platforms now. I do think we have better routes to change that conversation. So I don't need to survive anymore. Like I'm not trying to survive out here. I'm actually trying to thrive. You know what I mean? I'm trying to reach for as high as I could go. Like I'm not just trying to just slide under the radar. That's not what the opportunity is. That's not the precedent that I want to set for my kids and your kids as they go into the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's not going to push us. That's not going to push us forward.
So there you are in your first job and you're taught to assimilate. Like walk me through some of those memories, right? Like what are some of the lessons that you're being taught is to like literally not even look someone in the eye, which in some ways goes completely against like quote unquote American business practices, right? It's like
Yeah.
firm handshake, look them in the eye, all these things. Like tell me about that conflict versus like the lessons that you were taught versus like your experience and like how that was.
I mean, so that don't look people in the eyes thing like really shook me up for a while. Even the comment that people didn't see me as Asian, shook me for a while because to them they're like, oh yeah, 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 and they get on with their lives, right? And yeah, I said this thing, whatever, right? To me, I'm like, that's gonna be with me for the rest of my life. Hooray, right? There are so many of those instances though throughout the earlier part of my career where I was just learning who I was, my voice, and my place in all of this. And I'll take for example, we were in a meeting. I was 2 years into my first job, and we're in an all hands meeting for the organization that I was in, for the team that I was on. And I saw a strategy that I felt was not the right strategy. And I raised my hand, I get called on, and I said, I don't think this is the right strategy for these reasons. Boom, boom, boom. I think we should do this. I think we should do that. I think we should do that. Right? All facts. Right? And I could see around me people were nodding. And they're like, that's great. Thank you so much, Eric. We're going to take that into consideration. And ultimately, they took everything that I said and they were grateful that I spoke up. Right? I get out of that meeting, and I'll always remember this. An older gentleman, probably about 15 years my senior, pulls me aside and he's like, Eric, let me talk to you. He's like, you can't do that. You can't like just speak out like that without checking off, like, was this okay to say? Was this, okay by the organization's rules and all that stuff. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, it's free speech. And also just like, we need to encourage other people to speak up, especially if they have better ideas, or else we're going to go to market with bad ideas. And they're like,
Right.
oh, it's like, Eric, you people don't do that. You people don't do that, Eric. Like just work super hard and you'll get recognition. You don't need to do that. You people don't need to do that. And like, just keep your nose clean and you'll be all right.
You
Oh,
people.
and I was like, damn. And I was like 24, right? And this dude was, I want to say like 45 or something.
Yeah.
And he was older and he was dressed really nice. And so I was intimidated and I respected him until that moment. And, everything I'm saying, like, it's all compounding, right?
Mhm.
So I'm harboring all of these aggressions against me. And again, like, I've taken all of these things, and that's why you hear the voice that you do. That's why you see the fight that you do. That's why you see me do the things I do. It's because I'm taking all of these as just gas, right? I wasn't able to do it then. And I regret that. I regret that I wasn't able to fight back. I wasn't able to speak out, and I wasn't able to wield the words that I do now. And I regret that. But now I
Tell me
can.
about tell me about some of those fears though. Like, what do you think you fear? Like being fired, being seen as aggressive? Like, I don't know. Like, what were some of those things that you thought?
Definitely fear of being fired. Definitely fear of being isolated out, that I wouldn't be included in meetings, that they would lose respect for me because I was doing that, that people would leave me out of opportunities. And in the earlier part of career, you're hungry for opportunities. You're hungry for
Yeah.
anything that comes your way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're also very worried that no one's going to support you if you do continue to speak up, that you'll just be some, outcast. And they're like, oh, that's just like, it's crazy, Eric.
That's crazy. You know, it
Right.
it's it might be funny, but like those are the labels that get placed on people though.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Of course.
Yeah.
Think about all the labels that were placed on women when they used to do the same thing.
Mhm.
She's bossy. Oh, no,
Yeah.
no, no. She's too much.
Yeah.
Or, oh, like, um, all of these different, like, harmful labels
Sassy.
that, yeah, sassy. Or, you know what? They used to put, like, I don't know, cuss words on them.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I'd be remiss to say, if anybody ever tries to tell that to my daughter, oh, you got hell coming for you. You got hell coming for you. You know, like,
Yeah.
but think about that though. Like, the entire female gender, that's the way that they were treated in the workplace, should they even consider speaking up. Now, imagine if you are a female and a minority,
Mhm.
10 times worse, you would probably even get fired. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And so I think that's what you're fighting against. And that's what the fears over generations are, like, ingrained in you. If you don't assimilate, and if you don't, all those things.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating too, because as you've grown in your career, you've become more outspoken, and not just in a meeting, hey, I think we should move on with a different strategy, right? Like, you're outspoken in a couple different ways. One about like your personal experience, but also the experience of like your family, your community. And
Yep.
there was one post in particular that stood out to me, and I'm going to paraphrase. So like, correct me and let me know exactly
Yeah.
what you meant. But it was along the lines of like, I never spoke up because I always thought that someone else would speak up on behalf of me, something like that. And
Yep.
then no one did. So here I am. Right. But as you start speaking up, like, don't those same fears come to mind? Before Eric answers that question, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsor.
COVID-19 moves fast, and now you can too. If you feel symptoms, even if they're mild, you should test fast. Test positive and at high risk for severe COVID-19? Then act fast with authorized oral treatments that can be taken at home and must be taken within 5 days from when symptoms begin. COVID-19 moves fast, and now you can too by asking your healthcare provider if an oral treatment is right for you. Learn about a treatment option at treatcv19.com. This message is sponsored by Pfizer.
You're being fired. Someone's going to tell you not to say that. All those same things, although you have more experience and a better resume now, but like, do those same things come up?
Not as much. I think I've selfishly focused on my entire career, voice, and platform in the advertising and marketing industry for over 10 years. And I've put up solid wins on the board. I've made the brands that I've worked for very, very famous and a lot of money. And I think all of that, yes, builds a great resume, but it also builds credibility and validation in my voice. And while I've only spoken, at least for the past, before the past 2 years, I've only spoken on behalf of the marketing and advertising industry. When I did say something, it was reacted with credibility and validation. So when I shifted and started talking about some of the injustices and uncomfortable truths that govern our industry, like, I don't know, for example, less than 20% of the entire marketing and advertising industry, it's actually closer to 15%, is represented by the Black, Latinx, and Asian communities. Less than 15%. Wow. That is astonishingly disappointing, especially when you think about every single ad that you see. How many people that look like us? Oh, cool. So they could represent us for sure. But are we making the decisions about that? Absolutely not. And so when I started to speak out, I think the first initial part, the first time I spoke out around the violence against the Asian American community, my wife will tell you I didn't sleep for 2 days because I was waiting for that piece that I wrote to come out. And I was very scared. What if it failed? What if no one read it? And what if everybody hates me for it? Because I've never done this, right? Now, if I'm talking about an advertising campaign that I did with a great agency, I know that's going to hit, right? I feel good. I felt good about that. But talking about your skin in an industry that has paid you a lot of money to make money for them, very, very difficult. And so I didn't sleep. The piece came out. Everybody told me it was great before that. And I was like, I'm going to throw up. It goes live, and then it does what it does. And it did change the conversation quite a bit, at least for the business community that, are represented by a tremendous amount of Asians. So I do think I was scared a little bit, but now when I speak out, I know why I'm doing it. I know the value that I'm bringing. But I also know that it's going to unlock a lot more people to do the same thing. And I'm not saying anything, salacious or uncommon. I'm just talking truth here, man. I'm talking sheer numbers. It's like, less than 15% is represented by people that look like you and me. That is an issue, and the only way you're going to change that issue is if you speak on it. Because if you don't, no one's going to care. No one's going to know.
And also, like, who will? If you don't, then who will?
And
it's kind of like, there's this, I forget what the theory is, but it's like, if everyone lives in a building and there's a crime happening outside, everyone in the building is going to assume like, oh, someone else will call, right? Totally. But then eventually, like, no one calls. I forget what the theory is, but it's kind of like that same theory or narrative.
Yeah. You know what? There used to be this one like interview question I used to ask people just to gauge like values and purpose. And then I was told I can't ask that anymore. I used to say at the end of the interview, and so I hope whoever I've ever interviewed, if I ask you this question, I'm sorry I asked the question, even though I think it's a good judge of character. I used to ask, I was like, there's a burning building and you hear this screaming on the top floor. What do? You gonna run in? You're gonna wait for someone to help? And I would tell you about 60 to 40% would say they'd run in. And I never asked myself, what would I do? Never. I just thought it would be an interesting question to ask. And I was like, oh, it's just a good judge of character, whatever, right? There's no right answer, to be honest with you. But then I see a burning building and it's about my community. And I asked myself, what the hell am I going to do? And a lot of people told me not to do it. A lot of people told me, don't write the piece, don't speak out, don't go on TV. specifically people who were related to me. And I did it. I ran into the fire and I didn't die. And immediately you start to see other people run into the fire. And so I do think there's something to be said around knowing who you are, what governs you, the values that you hold. And in a split second, if you do see a burning building, what do you do? Because if you don't see anybody else running, but you hear the screaming, you got to do something. And for me, it was to run into that building. And I knew what was at stake. I knew what I would be sacrificing. And again, like I felt confident in the decision that I made to run in and see what I can do.
I think it's easy to say, yeah, I'll run into the building.
Yes.
There's another type of person, specific type of person that would actually run into that building. And I applaud you for that. I'm also curious though, because I've been outspoken about a few different things, and I've gotten you should have tried to handle this internally, right? Or why go public? Or, I'm worried about the impact this would have on your career. It's kind of like the same people that I would expect to have my back actually told me that they were disappointed in what I did. But then I realized, I was like, oh shit, like they're closer to that like family trauma, old schoolness of fear and not being able to speak up for yourself and all those kind of things. I was like, damn, maybe that's what it is. Like, I'm wondering for you, like, was it more so the older generation that kind of gave you some of that same feedback as well?
I would definitely say yes, to a certain extent. And this is what's interesting, is that in the initial parts of my advocacy and outreach, I did get that feedback. Like, this is too hot. This is too hot, especially because I'm having
too hot.
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. It's too hot. Like, you're gonna put a target on your back. Like, people are gonna come for you, Eric. I was like,
yes.
And I was like, I don't know about that. Because I think too, it was in a time in which like people could dox you real easily, right? Like,
what do you mean?
Like they'll figure out your address and they'll come to your house, all that stuff. You know what I mean? So people could do that, right? So I think a lot of the older people were like, Eric, like, you're gonna put a target on your family's back, all that stuff. And I was like, I get that for sure, right? But no one else is doing anything. And like, we need to speak up. And the reality is, it's like, there are certain things intersecting for me. The first thing is like, I'm young, I'm Asian, and no one else is speaking about this. There's no celebrities, there's no influencers. And I work at a company that supports me doing what I do. And you know what?
Very important.
I'm going to use everything in my power, to make sure people care that our people are getting killed in the streets. The end. Right. And I think they got that. And they're like, oh, he's doing a good thing and he's pushing us forward, et cetera. The most interesting thing though, was after they came around, then I got the younger generation, or at least in my generation, were like, well, why you?
Really?
I was like, why me? I was like, why me? I was like, you're just asking that because you saw that I didn't die in the fire. You literally asking that. And I told some people, well, Lizette was on your pod, right? Yeah. So Lizette is a huge friend, peer, and mentor to me. And she coached me throughout this entire thing. And I was telling Lizette, I was like, Lizette, like, I'm getting some feedback from not older people, but people around my age asking, why you? And the first thing she's like, it is funny. Sometimes it really be your own, huh? And I was like, yeah, sometimes it really does. And she's like, no. She's like, you keep doing what you're doing. She's like, there's always going to be people that are just like, well, I should have done that. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, because they absolutely should. But she's like, it's very clear then that they were probably motivated by the wrong things. Whereas you're motivated by just doing the right thing in that moment and just keep it going. The mission, go for the mission. And so, Lizette was a tremendous friend, and just like ear to have, especially as these people my age were like, why you?
That's fascinating. I didn't know that you got that type of feedback. From the outside perspective, you're like on Good Morning America and like every like news outlet and all these things getting celebrated for speaking out and becoming that representation in a lot of ways that maybe you wish you had when you were younger.
You're right. I think I didn't have that type of air cover, if you want to call it that, or just even representation to see people stand up when I was younger, even to the point when like I was a kid. Like there were so many times in which my family had to leave a restaurant because someone on the other table was running their mouth.
Really?
Someone running their mouth and my food's not even there yet, or the food gets there and my dad's like, no, we're gone. And that's embarrassing, right? And it's a restaurant full of people and no one stands up and you're like, what? Like, where are you? Right. And so
what sort of experience was that? Like, what do you mean? Like, what happened?
I mean, you're sitting down at a table in my hometown, in the Bay Area, and you think the Bay Area is like, oh, it's massively diverse. So it's not. There's pockets, and I grew up in one of those pockets. It's not diverse, but you sit down at a table, and with your brother and your sister, and your mom and your dad, and someone across on another table is either belittling a waitress, or because of her accent, or they see you and you don't look like other people in the restaurant, and you start running your mouth, saying slurs, doing the slanty eye thing, all that stuff, man.
Yeah.
And what's most interesting is that it wasn't, it wasn't an isolated incident. I've seen that so many times in my life where I do wonder like how there could be bystanders and just let it happen. Oh, I'm just gonna keep my head down. Like I'm not gonna do anything, to the point where like you have to walk out of the restaurant and no one is sticking up for you.
Yeah.
And so that traumatizes you. Like you hold that in your heart. Or even when I grew up, in the same town, you go and again, like there's not a lot of Asian families, but you go and ask, I don't know, a girl to homecoming, and she tells you dead eye, I don't like Asian guys there. Straight up. Straight up, I don't like Asian guys. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. I hate myself. Great. You walk away. You hold all that, right?
Yeah.
And throughout the course of all of this, it took one interview live right here as I'm sitting down right here. It was live on TV, and my kids were in the other room with my wife. And I'm going through the interview, all my talking points, this is why I'm doing it, etc. And my wife texts me a picture of my son watching me on TV live. And he's just watching me, right? It's on my IG at Toda. And I realized at that moment, at the time at least, I was like, I don't know what any of this is. I'm just trying to help. And the TV likes me and people like what I'm saying. And so I'm just going to try to see where it goes and maybe I help. At that moment, though, when I saw that picture of my son watching me on TV, I realized at that moment, I will never, ever, 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 ever let him remember me as just a marketer, as just a businessman, ever again. Ever again. If he remembers me as just a businessman or a marketer, I didn't do a good job with the rest of my life. And so what I became in that moment wasn't like an activist with like a cardboard, thing and like, marching down the street. What I became was someone so secure in my voice and in all of my past traumas to let it fuel me to say, I will never let this happen, or I'll try my damnedest to never let this happen to not just people that look like my son and look like my daughter, but people that look like you.
Yeah.
And people that look like their friends. I will make sure, at least through as much as I can, to have them all remember me when it's all said and done as just someone that just fought for them, because I didn't have people that fought for me when I was growing up.
I love that. Like you become who you needed. And I love that representation that your son is probably seeing. And I'm legit getting goosebumps. What even gave you the boost of confidence to even start becoming more of your authentic self, right? Because you speak about this experience like maybe 10 years ago. What was that point 10 years ago where you were just like, I'm going to start being more of myself?
This happens to a lot of communities, but more so the Asian American community. When I realized being the quote unquote model minority will not get me to where I want to go in my ambitions, in my career, nor will it open any doors for people that come after me. If I'm the model minority, that means literally keeping my head down, staying silent, not speaking up, and just like, I don't know, being good at math or something. It's exactly like what society, especially American culture, has painted the Asian American diaspora as. It's like,
Yeah.
you're like this silent community that is super smart, moderately successful, and raceless, essentially. I realized if I became the model minority, it would do significantly more harm than good. But what it took for me to realize that was when I was at Nike. And when I was at Nike, I found myself at the Major League Baseball All-Star game in Minneapolis in 2000, I want to say 14.
Mhm.
And I was surrounded by other executives, all white, all in their 50s, and I was 27.
Wow.
Leading digital specifically for the MLB. And I sitting around this like massive dinner table where all of them were cheersing and all of them were talking about sports, which is like a dream come true, especially as a baseball fan like me. And I was like, oh, I have this knowledge. I got this conversation on lock. I was like, put me against any of these guys, and like I'll debate them about who is the greatest slugger, Barry Bonds, of all time. Right. And
That's not bias, right?
It's
Like
not
that's not
biased.
San Francisco bias, No.
I'm used to the cap jersey. But I felt good. I was like, I have two choices in this moment. I could just sit here and like sip my wine and like, like kind of contribute to the conversation. Or I could do what I do with my friends and just try to obliterate each other with the useless sports knowledge that I have in my head from like years of just being a fan. And that's exactly what I did. I was like, what? Are you kidding? Like we were watching the home run derby, right? From a box with dinner in like the most fanciest thing ever. And here I was, the only minority in the room, the youngest by at least two decades. And I was holding my own with these executives that knew a ton about baseball, but I knew more. And I was like, and they were loving it. And I was loving it. And I was like, if this is what it takes to be successful in my career, which is literally just me being me, and being confident and not seeing that they're different color than me and not seeing that they're different ages than me and literally only seeing it as you have information, I have information, let's see what happens, then this might be the secret.
So was that the first time? Was that the first time where you were just like actually showed people some of your interest and by doing
100%. That was
really?
the first time. That was 5 years into my career. And I was like, I'm loving this. And then they're like, well, Eric, like, let's talk about, okay, if you really are a sports fan, Eric, what's your favorite shoe? And I was like, oh, you want to go here? I was like, please go here. I was like, please go here. I was like, I have over 300 pairs of shoes. And you want to know how deep I go? Favorite pair of shoes is the Foamposite 1 Royal OG that Penny Hardaway wore in the 97 playoffs, which also Mike Bibby wore in the 97 Final Four. And they're like, this guy knows. and I was like, of course, hell yeah, I know. I was like, what, you think I don't like sports? And that unlocked a tremendous amount of opportunities. Well, Eric, you should talk to the Nike basketball team. Or Eric, you know what? Let's go meet Mike Trout. And I want you to tell Mike Trout all the things that you know about Ken Griffey Jr. because you are going to launch the first signature Nike baseball shoe since Ken Griffey Jr. And I was like, fantastic. Let's do it. Let's go. Right. And what I realized is like the more I embraced who I was, my experience, the things that I love, pop culture, sports, specifically the NBA, like the more it unlocks commonalities way past the face value of you're much older than me and I am not white. And the more that I embraced those commonalities and found middle ground, the quicker the opportunities and doors opened up.
Yeah. Yo, the same thing happened to me. Like I was so focused on assimilating because I didn't want to stand out.
Yeah.
Because I was taught, probably similar to you, is like standing out is bad. Like you don't want to do that because but then by not standing out, what I did was fit in, which is what I wanted to do. But by fitting in, like people couldn't necessarily differentiate me and I couldn't show off those interests. But as soon as I started showing off those interests, to your point, you start building that commonality. You start, by standing out, what you become is interesting and people want to know about all of these interesting things and tidbits, and you start to build those relationships. So I love that. I love that example. And just to highlight, also my favorite shoe, I have so many pairs of foam posits, but I don't have that pair. That's the pair that I've always wanted. I see them up there.
You see them, man. Yeah, you see them. That was like, I literally used those shoes for my firstborn's birth announcement. No, for real, man. Because like, for like those shoes changed my entire life. Because again, I grew up in the 90s in a predominantly white area where I turn on the TV, I don't see myself. And the only culture I saw speaking to me was NBA Black culture. To the end. Like that was culture to me. That was culture to me because I don't see myself on TV. I don't see myself in ads. But what is cool and what energizes me was that culture. And I just attached myself to it to the point where it drove me all the way to Nike. It drove me all the way to Beaverton to express my love of shoes, to express my love of culture, to express my love of hip hop, because that's just who I am. And I think the reality is, again, like just like we spoke about way early, is that there are so many people that look like me and you that grew up the same way, that didn't see themselves. So they attach themselves to different cultures, etc., which is about not being something hyphen American. That's literally just being American. That's it, right? And so you see a bunch of people that are like us, really share the same passions. It doesn't matter what skin color they got, but they all grew up the same way. And I think that's the most interesting thing is like when you think about culture and when you think about especially pop culture or sports culture, like what a commonality to attach yourselves to. You know what I mean? It could be an airport bar. I could be in Singapore, you know, at a business meeting. And in the minute that they're like, well, Eric, like who's your favorite basketball player? Steph Curry, because you're from the Bay Area. I was like, hell no, Penny Hardaway. And they're like, what? Penny Hardaway? He only played like 4 real years. I was like, but those years were amazing. Yeah, those years were amazing. Look at what he did to shoe culture, and look at what he did to, you know, to TV commercials. Like he's the, like Penny Hardaway and those phone posits are literally the reason why I'm in marketing. The reason is because of all that. And it's not because I assimilated, and it's not because I needed to be a doctor or a lawyer, etc. It's because I saw culture and belonging in something that didn't represent me, but represented something that energized me. And I think that's what it really matters, is like you got to attach yourself to things that give you energy. And those little shoes right there gave me so much energy to do all of this.
I love it. And you probably answered this last question, but might as well finish off with it. What motivates you and inspires you to keep going, to continue being your most authentic self?
Again, like I refuse to let my kids remember me as a businessman, a marketer, because that means I really didn't do a good job with the rest of my life. Like I want them to remember me as someone that did the right thing, that fought for their people, that fought for people that look like them. And my kids aren't even full Asian, man, you know, but they're Jewish and white and Filipino and Japanese, and they're all these different things, and their friends are the same way, and like they're all shades of brown, and that's fantastic. But they need someone to fight for them. They need more people to fight for them, for their future. And if all they remember is that I just made little TV ads here and there, or I won awards, oh, my dad won so many awards, no one cares. But they do care if I make sure the government gives their people a national museum on the National Mall. They will care about that. They will care if I make sure that federal curriculum includes their people's stories and their friends' people's stories. They will care about that. And if I can use marketing in my advertising career to make sure that door opens, then that means I didn't just become a great marketer and advertiser, but I used it to influence everything else. And that's exactly what all of us should be doing. All of us should be understanding that we're so much more than just what governs us 9 to 5, but we can use those skills. We can use that success to make even more of a dent in the world where we previously couldn't. And so that's what motivates me. And that's what I look at. That's when I look at my kids and I look at what I want the world to be like for them. That's why I do what I do, man.